You've been trying to save someone who doesn't want to be saved. You've been pouring your energy into a person who looks at your efforts with confusion, or worse, contempt. You've been carrying the weight of their transformation on your shoulders while they remain perfectly still, perfectly unchanged, perfectly themselves. And you're exhausted. You tell yourself that if you just find the right words, if you just show them the right perspective, if you just love them hard enough or challenge them fiercely enough, something will finally click. The scales will fall from their eyes. They will see what you see. They will become who you know they could be. But here's the brutal truth that no one wants to tell you. You cannot change them, not because you're not smart enough, or loving enough, or persistent enough. You cannot change them because the person you see standing in front of you, the one you're desperately trying to reach, is not the whole story. They are an iceberg, and you're trying to melt the tip while ignoring the massive, frozen continent that exists beneath the surface. Carl Jung spent his entire life mapping the architecture of the human psyche, and what he discovered should terrify and liberate you in equal measure. The conscious mind, the part of a person that speaks and decides and presents itself to the world, represents maybe 10% of who they actually are. The rest is submerged in the dark waters of the unconscious, invisible, unmovable, formed over decades by experiences you will never fully understand. This is why your words bounce off them like rain on stone. This is why your love, no matter how genuine, cannot reach them. You're speaking to the tip of the iceberg, while the massive bulk beneath remains untouched, unchanged, and fundamentally unreachable by anything you say or do. And the moment you understand this, truly understand this, is the moment you stop drowning in the impossible task of changing other people. But first, you need to see what you're really up against. You need to understand what lies beneath the surface, the hidden architecture that makes people who they are, the unmovable mass that will defeat every attempt you make to reshape them. Because once you see the iceberg for what it is, everything changes. Imagine standing at the edge of a frozen sea. You see a jagged piece of ice jutting from the water. It's maybe 6 feet tall, sharp, dangerous, cold to the touch. That's what you think you're dealing with when you interact with another person. The visible part, the behaviors, the words, the surface personality. But if you could drain the ocean and see what actually exists beneath that visible tip, you would find something monstrous in its scale. A cathedral of ice stretching hundreds of feet down into the darkness, formed over decades, frozen solid, connected to a vast network of experiences and memories, and wounds that you will never see. This is the Jungian unconscious. And this is why you cannot change anyone. Jung called this hidden realm the personal unconscious and the collective unconscious, 2 layers of psychological material that operate completely outside conscious awareness, but determine almost everything about how a person thinks, feels, and behaves. The personal unconscious contains every forgotten memory, every repressed trauma, every experience that shaped them from childhood forward. The moment their father screamed at them for crying, frozen in the iceberg. The year they spent invisible to everyone at school, frozen in the iceberg. The betrayal that taught them never to trust, frozen in the iceberg. The humiliation that convinced them they were worthless, frozen in the iceberg. Layer upon layer upon layer of psychological material, all compressed into a massive structure that exists entirely outside conscious awareness. And beneath that, the collective unconscious, the inherited psychological patterns of the entire human species. Archetypal structures that existed before they were born and will exist after they die. The mother, the father, the hero, the shadow, the anima, the animus. Ancient patterns of behavior and response that pulse through every human being like a second DNA. You think you're trying to change a person. You're actually trying to reshape a geological formation that took decades to form and is rooted in patterns that are millions of years old. And here's what makes this even more devastating. The person you're trying to change, they don't even know this iceberg exists. They experience themselves as that 6-foot piece of ice jutting from the water. They think their conscious decisions and rational thoughts are what drive them. They have no idea that 90% of their psychology is hidden from them, that their reactions are being dictated by material they cannot see, and patterns they did not choose. When you point out their patterns, they genuinely don't understand what you're talking about. When you try to show them their wounds, they look at you like you're speaking a foreign language. The iceberg is invisible to them, and it's controlling everything. You're not trying to change a person. You're trying to change a vast unconscious structure that has been forming since they took their first breath. And every word you speak, every intervention you attempt, every moment of love or frustration or desperate pleading is hitting that 6-foot tip while the cathedral beneath remains untouched, unmovable, eternal. But you need to understand how that iceberg formed in the first place. You need to see the origins of the unmovable, because hidden in that understanding is the key to your liberation. Every human being starts as liquid water, pure potential, unformed, capable of taking any shape. And then life begins to freeze them. The iceberg you see in front of you, the person you're desperately trying to change, didn't choose their shape. They were shaped by forces beyond their control, frozen into the configuration they now inhabit. And this freezing process, it starts immediately. From the moment of birth, every experience begins to solidify the structure. The mother, who was present or absent. The father, who was loving or terrifying. The siblings, who were allies or enemies. The community that embraced them or rejected them. Every interaction, every wound, every moment of safety or danger, all of it gets compressed into the iceberg. Jung understood this with devastating clarity. He saw that the first few years of life create what he called complexes, patterns of emotional response that become autonomous, self-perpetuating, disconnected from rational control. A child who grows up with an angry father doesn't just remember the anger. They internalize it. They build an entire psychological structure around it. Fear of authority, compulsive people-pleasing, explosive rage that seems to come from nowhere. And that structure, it's not a memory they can simply update with new information. It's part of the iceberg now, frozen solid, operating automatically. Here's what you need to understand. By the time a person reaches adulthood, most of their iceberg is already formed. Most of who they are has already been decided by experiences they don't remember and patterns they can't see. The alcoholic father, frozen into the iceberg at age 5. The mother, who was emotionally unavailable, frozen into the iceberg at age 7. The trauma that convinced them the world is dangerous, frozen into the iceberg at age 12. The humiliation that taught them to never be vulnerable, frozen into the iceberg at age 16. layer upon layer of frozen psychological material, all formed before they had any conscious choice. And then they grow up. They become an adult. They develop a rational mind. They think they're in control of their lives. But that massive structure beneath the surface, it's still there, still operating, still dictating their reactions and relationships and fundamental approach to the world. And you come along with your love or your wisdom or your desperate desire to help them, and you speak to the conscious mind, the 6-foot tip of ice, while the cathedral beneath remains frozen exactly as it was. This is why addicts relapse. This is why abusers repeat their patterns. This is why the depressed person cannot simply choose to be happy. You're asking them to change the tip of the iceberg while ignoring the massive, frozen structure. And here's the part that will break your heart. Even if they want to change, even if they sincerely desire transformation, even if they're trying with everything they have, they cannot access the iceberg on their own. Jung knew this. He knew that the unconscious material that controls us can only be reached through years of careful, painful, specialized psychological work. Analysis, dream work, active imagination, shadow integration. The kind of work that requires a trained guide and years of commitment and the willingness to descend into the darkest parts of the psyche. You think a conversation is going to reach that? You think your love, however genuine, is going to melt decades of frozen trauma? You think your frustration is going to reshape patterns that were formed before they even had language? This is the origins of the unmovable. And this is why you need to stop. But there's something even more painful you need to understand. Something about why your love, specifically, cannot reach them. This is where it gets personal. You love them, genuinely love them. You can see who they could be. You can see the potential buried beneath the dysfunction. You can see the beautiful person hiding under the addiction, the trauma, the defensive walls. And you think that if you just love them hard enough, if you just show them that someone believes in them, something will shift. They will finally feel safe enough to change. They will finally trust enough to let go of their patterns. Your love will be the thing that melts the iceberg. But it won't. And here's why. The iceberg isn't just made of frozen experiences. It's made of frozen defenses. Every pattern they have, every behavior that frustrates you, every wall they've built exists for a reason. It protected them once. Maybe it doesn't serve them now. Maybe it's destroying their life. Maybe it's pushing away everyone who cares about them. But at some point in their past, that pattern saved them. And the unconscious doesn't care about logic. It doesn't care about growth. It doesn't care about your love. It cares about survival. And every attempt you make to change them is registered by the unconscious as a threat. You're not offering love. You're offering danger. You're asking them to dismantle the very structures that kept them alive. Carl Jung called this the shadow. The parts of ourselves we have rejected and repressed because they were too dangerous or too painful to acknowledge. And the shadow doesn't heal through love. It heals through integration, through the slow, painful process of bringing unconscious material into consciousness and metabolizing it. A process that can only happen from within. When you try to love someone into change, what you're actually doing is asking them to face their shadow before they're ready. You're asking them to look at the parts of themselves they've spent decades hiding from. The weakness they cannot admit, the rage they cannot feel, the pain they cannot touch, and the unconscious responds the only way it knows how. resistance, defense, rejection of you and everything you represent. This is why the addict gets angry when you express concern. This is why the avoidant person runs when you get close. This is why your words of encouragement are met with hostility or indifference. You're not speaking to their conscious desire for change. You're triggering the unconscious defense mechanisms that have kept them safe for decades. And those mechanisms are far more powerful than any love you can offer. But here's the part that will hurt the most. The more you try to change them, the more you would reinforce the very patterns you're trying to break. Every intervention, every conversation, every moment of caring frustration, all of it tells their unconscious that you see them as broken, that you cannot accept them as they are, that your love is conditional on their transformation. And the unconscious responds by doubling down on the defenses, by freezing even harder, by making change even more impossible. You think you're helping. You're actually making it worse. You think you're loving them. You're actually confirming their deepest fear that they are unlovable as they are. And the iceberg grows. The defenses strengthen. The distance between you increases, until you're standing on opposite sides of a frozen ocean, screaming at each other across an impossible divide. This is why your love cannot reach them. It's not about the strength of your feelings or the purity of your intentions. It's about the fundamental structure of the human psyche. Change happens from within, or it doesn't happen at all. But there's something even more devastating you need to see. Something about what you're actually fighting when you try to change another person. Something about the shadow you're refusing to face in yourself. Here's the question you don't want to answer. Why are you so invested in changing them? Not the surface answer. Not the one about love or concern or wanting what's best for them. The real answer. The one hidden in your own unconscious. Because Jung discovered something that will shatter your understanding of this entire dynamic. When you're desperately trying to change another person, you're not really fighting their iceberg. You're fighting your own shadow. Projection. That's the word Jung used. The unconscious process by which we take the parts of ourselves we cannot face and see them in other people instead. Every quality that disturbs you in another person exists somewhere in your own unconscious. Every flaw you're trying to fix in them is a flaw you cannot face in yourself. Every pattern you're desperately trying to change in them is a pattern you're refusing to see in your own life. You think you're trying to help them. You're actually trying to control the parts of yourself that terrify you. The person who cannot stop trying to fix their partner's emotional unavailability. They're running from their own fear of vulnerability. The parent who cannot stop trying to control their child's choices. They're fighting their own sense of powerlessness. The friend who cannot stop trying to rescue the addict. They're avoiding their own need to be needed. This is the hidden game. This is what you're really doing when you exhaust yourself trying to change someone else. You're externalizing your own inner work. You're projecting your own shadow onto another person and then fighting it there instead of facing it in yourself. And the unconscious loves this game. It loves it because projection is so much easier than integration. It's so much easier to see the problem in someone else and to face the problem in yourself. It's so much easier to pour your energy into fixing them than to do the brutal work of fixing yourself. And so you stay locked in this dance, trying to change them, failing, trying harder, failing again, all while the real work, the work of facing your own iceberg, remains undone. Jung was ruthless about this. He insisted that any strong emotional reaction to another person is a mirror. What disturbs you in them exists in you. What you're trying to eliminate in them is what you're trying to eliminate in yourself. And until you turn that mirror around and face what you're really fighting, you will remain trapped in the impossible task of changing the unchangeable. Think about it. Why does their addiction bother you so much? What are you addicted to that you refuse to see? Why does their emotional unavailability enrage you? What emotions are you unavailable to in yourself? Why does their refusal to change terrify you? What part of yourself are you refusing to transform? These are not comfortable questions. These are shadow questions. Questions that demand you stop looking at them and start looking at yourself. And here's the devastating truth. The person you're trying to change will never change as long as you're trying to change them. Your very attempts at transformation are holding them in place because you're not giving them space to face their own iceberg. You're too busy projecting your own shadow onto them and fighting it there. You're not seeing them as they are. You're seeing them as a screen for your own unconscious material. And they can feel it. On some level, they can feel that you're not really seeing them, that you're fighting something in yourself and using them as the battlefield. And so they resist. They defend. They refuse to change, exactly as you would if someone tried to do the same to you. This is the shadow you're really fighting, your own. And until you withdraw that projection and face your own iceberg, you will remain enslaved to the impossible task of fixing them. But understanding this creates a new problem, a deeper trap, one that will consume years of your life if you don't see it clearly. Let me tell you what happens when you make someone else's transformation your responsibility. You become a slave, not to them, to the fantasy of who they could be. You wake up thinking about their potential. You go to sleep frustrated by their resistance. Every conversation becomes an intervention. Every interaction becomes a test of whether they're finally changing. You scan them constantly for signs of progress. You celebrate tiny victories that disappear the next day. You interpret their words, looking for evidence that they're finally seeing what you see. And slowly, invisibly, your entire sense of self becomes wrapped up in their transformation. You cannot be okay unless they're okay. You cannot be happy unless they're changing. You cannot move forward in your own life because you're waiting for them to move forward in theirs. This is the tyranny of fixing, and it will destroy you. Nietzsche understood power dynamics better than anyone, and he would look at your situation with cold clarity and tell you exactly what's happening. You have voluntarily given away your power. You have placed your sense of worth, your emotional stability, your very identity into the hands of someone who cannot and will not change. And now you're trapped. Because walking away feels like giving up on them. Staying feels like sacrificing yourself. And both options fill you with guilt and resentment in equal measure. This is what happens when you try to change another person. You don't just fail to change them. You imprison yourself in the attempt. You become the one who's frozen, the one who cannot move, the one whose life is on hold, waiting for someone else to thaw. And here's the cruelest part. They know. On some level, they know you need them to change more than they need to change. They can feel the weight of your expectations, the pressure of your hope, the suffocating nature of your care, and it gives them all the power. Because as long as you're trying to change them, you're the one who's controlled. You're the one who's reacting to every move they make. You're the one who's emotionally dependent on their choices. You think you're helping them. You're actually giving them dominion over your entire emotional life. Jung would say you've lost touch with your own center, your own individuation process, your own journey toward psychological wholeness. You've abandoned yourself to chase their transformation. And this is the ultimate betrayal. Not of them, of yourself. because you had work to do. You had your own iceberg to explore, your own shadow to integrate, your own journey toward becoming who you're meant to be. And you gave it all up. You traded your sovereignty for the impossible fantasy that you could reshape another person's soul. And now, years have passed, and they haven't changed. But you have. You've become bitter, resentful, exhausted, a ghost of who you used to be. You've poured all your energy into someone else's cup while your own ran dry. And you're finally starting to ask the question you should have asked years ago. What the hell am I doing? This is the tyranny of fixing. This is what happens when you refuse to accept the fundamental truth of human psychology. You cannot change anyone. You can only change yourself. And until you turn away from their iceberg and face your own, you will remain enslaved to an impossible task and wonder why your life feels like it's passing you by. But there's a way out. There's a reframe, a shift in understanding that can liberate you from this prison you've built. And it starts with a truth so simple, it feels like blasphemy. You want to know the secret to helping someone change? Stop trying to change them. Walk away from their iceberg and return to your own. Let go of the fantasy that your love or your wisdom or your persistence will reshape them. Accept the brutal truth that they are exactly who they are, and they will remain who they are until they decide otherwise. And they might never decide otherwise. They might stay frozen in those patterns for the rest of their lives. And that is not your responsibility. This is sovereignty. Jung called it individuation, the process of becoming who you truly are instead of who everyone else needs you to be. And it starts with the most difficult boundary you will ever draw, the boundary between your life and theirs. Their iceberg is theirs to explore or ignore. Their shadow is theirs to integrate or project. Their transformation is theirs to pursue or abandon. You cannot do it for them. You cannot want it for them more than they want it. You cannot save them from themselves. All you can do is save yourself. And here's what happens when you do. When you withdraw your energy from the impossible task, when you withdraw your energy from the impossible task of changing them and redirect it toward your own transformation. When you stop projecting your shadow onto them and start integrating it yourself. When you stop making their choices your problem and start making your choices your priority. Something shifts, not in them, in you. You start to breathe again. You start to feel like yourself again. You start to remember that you had a life before you became consumed with fixing them. You start to reclaim the energy. You start to reclaim the energy you've been pouring into their cup. And you use that energy to finally do the work you've been avoiding. Your work, your shadow, your wounds, your patterns, your iceberg. The brutal, painful, liberating work of facing yourself without projection or distortion. And here's what Jung knew that most people never learn. When you do your own work, when you face your own shadow and integrate your own unconscious material, you become a completely different person. Not better in some moral sense, different in an essential sense. You stop needing to control others because you've learned to control yourself. You stop trying to fix others because you've learned to fix yourself. You stop seeing others as problems to solve and start seeing them as complete human beings whose journey is their own. And sometimes, when you make this shift, something miraculous happens. The person you were trying to change starts to change. Not because you're trying anymore, because you've stopped trying. Not because of your words, because of your example. Not because you pushed them, because you gave them space. When you withdraw your projection and return to your own work, you remove the pressure that was keeping them frozen. You stop being the enemy their unconscious was defending against. You become a mirror instead of a prison. And in that mirror, they might finally see themselves clearly enough to begin their own work. Or they might not. They might stay exactly as they are. And that has to be okay, because your sovereignty is not conditional on their transformation. Your wholeness is not dependent on their healing. Your journey is yours, and theirs is theirs. And the moment you truly accept this, the moment you truly let go of the fantasy that you can change them, is the moment you become free. Free to live your own life. Free to do your own work. Free to be sovereign over yourself and no one else. This is the reframe. This is the liberation. You don't need to change them. You need to stop trying to change them. You need to turn away from their iceberg and return to your own. You need to withdraw your projection. You need to withdraw your projection and integrate your shadow. You need to reclaim the energy you've been wasting on the impossible and redirect it toward the possible. Your own transformation, your own individuation, your own journey toward psychological wholeness. Because that's the only journey you can actually complete. That's the only work that's actually yours to do. And when you finally accept this, something inside you that's been frozen for years begins to thaw. Not their iceberg, yours. And that's where the real change begins. Let me be clear about what I'm saying. I'm not telling you to become cold. I'm not telling you to stop caring about people. I'm telling you to stop making their transformation your responsibility. I'm telling you to stop sacrificing yourself on the altar of someone else's potential. I'm telling you to stop trying to change people and start doing the only work that will actually matter. The work of changing yourself. Carl Jung spent decades helping people face their shadows. And the one truth he returned to again and again was this: the only person you can save is yourself. The only psyche you can heal is your own. The only iceberg you can explore is the one that exists beneath your own surface. Everything else is projection, fantasy, a way of avoiding the brutal work that's actually yours to do. You have been exhausted because you've been fighting the wrong battle. You have been frustrated because you've been trying to win an unwinnable war. You have been drowning because you've been trying to hold up someone who needs to learn to swim on their own. And it's time to stop. It's time to let go. It's time to turn away from their iceberg and face your own. Not because you don't care, because you care too much, because you've been caring for them at the expense of yourself, because you've been so focused on their transformation that you've abandoned your own. And your life is passing while you wait for theirs to begin. This is the final declaration. You cannot change anyone. You can only change yourself. And when you stop trying to do the former and commit to the latter, you don't just reclaim your life. You become the kind of person whose very presence invites transformation. Not through pressure, through peace, not through intervention, through integration, not through fixing, through simply being whole. And if they change, they change. And if they don't, they don't. And either way, you're free. Free to live, free to grow, free to become who you're meant to be, without waiting for anyone else's permission, or transformation, or approval. This is sovereignty. This is individuation. This is the only liberation that actually exists. So stop trying to change them and start the only work that will ever save you. The work of changing yourself. The iceberg beneath is not yours to melt. Your work is your work. Their work is theirs. And freedom begins the moment you finally accept the difference.